Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the government's decision to abolish temporary protection visas when Prime Minister Kevin Rudd took a similar decision in 2008. The result was more than 800 boats and 1,200 deaths at sea. Has the government received any warnings from agencies, officials, experts or foreign governments that this decision could lead to an increase in people smuggling arrivals?
Call the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. Well, this government will continue to be tough on borders without being weak on humanity.
Order. Order. Members on my left.
No.
Order. The member for Page. The House will come to order. The Prime Minister is.
I hear an old slag, and it worked well for you last May. Worked well for you. Can I?
The member for Barker. Prime Minister will have to call.
Can I make this point, Mr Speaker, that temporary protection visas and those impacted by this had this decision of the government, which we went to an election and made clear we would do before the election, and which we have informed governments, and the Leader of the Opposition would be aware because I informed him that the Indonesian Defence and Foreign Ministers, for example, were here last week. We've made very clear what our intentions are. We've put in place appropriate measures. Australia's Operation Sovereign Borders policy architecture remains unchanged. We've continued to operate on that basis. What we have done, though, is to not leave people in limbo who have been in Australia for a decade or more. This only applies to people from 2013 or before. So what we have in terms of those people is that during the 9 years in which they were in office, the 9 years, not one of those people was sent back.
The member for Barker.
Not one. To Afghanistan or Iran. If they're arguing they should be sent back, and if only they'd have got a fourth term, they would have acted and sent them back, then they should stand up and argue that that's the case.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, the question went to whether the Prime Minister has received advice that this backflip in policy would result in more boats likely to come.
Order. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The Prime Minister is in order. He is addressing the topic of the question. Order. Members on my right. The Minister for Early Childhood Education. The Prime Minister, in conclusion, will continue his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. We were very clear before the election. Very clear.
The member for Deakin is warned.
Exactly what we told the Australian people we would do before the election, and we have a mandate for it.
Give the call to the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government responding to the inflation challenge in the economy and addressing any barriers to the government's plan?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for her question, but also for the time we spent at the Ashwood, Ashburton, Chadstone Public Tenants Group at the hub there at the Beresford Park Reserve in Chatty. I also know now, talking to the Minister for Infrastructure, she worked at the Priceline at Chatty when she was going through uni. But thank you to the member for her question. The member understands, as does this government, that the big pressure on Australians right now is cost of living pressure. The big challenge in our economy is inflation, and that's what makes it the biggest focus of the Albanese Labor government. Our plan to address the inflation challenge has three parts to it. It's about relief, it's about repair, and it's about restraint. Relief, when it's responsible to do that. Cost of living relief, repairing the broken supply chains that made inflation worse, and showing spending restraint in the budget as well. Now, a key feature, Mr Speaker, of the May budget will be direct energy bill relief for struggling households and small businesses. And some really welcome news over the weekend and on Friday, more evidence from the energy market and from the Reserve Bank that our energy plan is taking the pressure off inflation by taking some of the sting out of these high energy prices. Now, the Reserve Bank's statement on Friday also reported that supply-side shocks account for at least half and as much as 3/4 of the inflation in our economy. And that's why the second part of our plan, repairing broken supply chains, is so critical. It's why we're addressing labour and skills shortages with fee-free TAFE and more uni places. It's why we're investing in cleaner and cheaper and more reliable energy. And it's why we're bringing in the National Reconstruction Fund to broaden and deepen our industrial base, to make our economy more resilient and self-sufficient, and to secure the high-wage, high-skilled jobs of the future. Now, it's not at all surprising, Mr Speaker, but it is disappointing that those opposite are standing in the way of so much of our economic plan. Especially disappointing because, having been so much of the problem over the past decade and contributing to this inflation challenge, they're now voting against the solutions. By voting against our energy plan, they are voting for even higher power prices and even higher inflation. By voting against a more resilient manufacturing sector, they are voting for even higher inflation for longer. And by voting against more affordable housing, they are voting for even higher inflation for even longer. Now, the Australian people are already paying a hefty enough price for the wasted decade of missed opportunities and messed up economic priorities of those opposite. Our job on this side of the House is to engage in the right and responsible economic plan, which is all about relief and repair and restraint in the budget. That's our job, and we will continue to do it.
Give the call to the honourable member for Macpherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the fact that this Prime Minister has spent decades as an activist seeking to change Labor policy on border protection, including campaigning against vote turnbacks, offshore processing and temporary protection visas. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that he's not received any advice that the government's watering down of Operation Sovereign Borders is likely to result in more people smuggling arrivals?
Order. Members on my right, there is far too much noise. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting. There is far too much noise in the chamber. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I can guarantee that we will implement the precise policy which we took to the election. The precise policy, which is the policy that I support because I'm the leader. And we took it to the election, and I haven't seen the need to swear myself in to other portfolios. Because when you lead your party to an election and win, as we did last May, you implement the policies that you put in place, and you don't run round and undermine your ministers like your leader did to you when you were the minister. I can also guarantee that we won't be sending out shonky text messages on the date of the next election.
The order. The House will come to order so I can hear the member for Hume, so I can hear from the member for Boothby, and I'll give her the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to create manufacturing jobs, and what challenges is it facing?
Good question.
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you very much to the member for that question, who comes from South Australia. South Australians get it. 7,000 or close to 7,000 manufacturing firms there. They want to see Australia be a country that makes things because they recognise the huge job impact and boost that comes from that. Secure, long-term, strong jobs that come out of manufacturing. And there couldn't be an even greater point in time where we need to see this happen, where we need to rebuild manufacturing capability. The Treasurer indicated to the House the contribution of supply-side shocks to inflation, happened under their watch, didn't do anything concrete about it, and at the point that we want to do something about it through a National Reconstruction Fund, what's the first thing they say? No. No to jobs, no to opportunity, no to growth, no to, in particular, people in the regions being able to have a chance to be involved. We said we would introduce a National Reconstruction Fund. We said it was important. We're getting on with the job of doing just that. Australia should be a country that makes things. It should be able to create jobs in our regions and our outer suburbs, and particularly ensure that Australians in those parts of our country will benefit from sustainable economic growth and have access to those jobs. And by the way, we want to create jobs in Aston, in Braddon, in Lindsay, in Casey, in Wide Bay, all the places that those opposite are denying us the chance and saying we should not have a fund that helps support regional manufacturers. I mean, they're prepared to dress in the high vis, they're never prepared to back it. Never ever prepared to back manufacturing workers and their businesses, content to do what they always do, which is to say no. We see a country, we have hope and we have belief that firms that need access to that capital, that want to be able to grow, we want to make sure that those firms never feel like they have to leave our shores to get support. We know that they deserve to get support. Mining science technology, food processing, transport manufacturing, medical devices and vaccines, renewables and low emissions technology, defence, all these areas that we see that activity that contribute to longer-term economic growth, deal with our supply-side challenges, create jobs. All very important. But again, on this side about Made in Australia, that side made overseas. That's what they're all about. We're about building capability. They're about making sure we're continually dependent on overseas supply chains. We know we can do better, and we will.
I give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Today, 19,000 refugees received the wonderful news that they would be granted permanent protection in Australia. However, a further 12,000 were not covered by this announcement. Some instead were covered by a failed fast-track program. These people have lived here for a decade. They're contributing to our society, and they are some of the most vulnerable in our community, including women from Afghanistan and Iran. What is their pathway to permanent protection?
I give the call to the Minister.
The member for Wentworth for her question and indeed her interest, which she's demonstrated consistently since coming to this place on these issues of people seeking asylum and, frankly, how we can be a nation that shows our better side to the world and indeed in this place shows a way in which we can work through difficult policy questions in a manner that is worthy of the Australian people and their innate decency. I do want to make a couple of points in response to her question, though. Firstly, as the Prime Minister has made very clear, what we have announced today is a statement that gives effect to a long-standing commitment, a commitment for which the Albanese Labor government has a clear mandate from the Australian people to recognise that this group of people, and as members opposite well know, this is the group of people who arrived long before, or before, I should say, Operation Sovereign Borders. And they should perhaps reflect that in some of their commentary if they are to act responsibly in our national interest, in our shared interest in ensuring that our border remains secure. I say that to members opposite. But what our announcement does is it does contemplate the circumstances of all people in this cohort. It does do that, and I know that I'll be briefing the member for Wentworth and other members of the crossbench on the details of this announcement later today. But let me say this. We contemplate the circumstances of all these people, including a large number 10 years on who are yet to have a primary decision, in a manner that is consistent with due process, but fundamentally comes back to this. We believe that it's people who are ultimately found to have been owed protection that should be able to access this pathway.
Give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the National Reconstruction Fund boost the Australian economy and help us to make our future here?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Dunkley for her question and for her support for manufacturing jobs in her electorate and in the other suburbs around eastern and southeastern Melbourne. On Saturday night, I attended with Minister Husic and with the Trade Minister, Don Farrell, the Food and Beverage Manufacturing Council annual function. It was held in Sydney. And one of the things that occurred all night was there was a queue of people to just ask, why is it that this is controversial? Why is it that the idea of establishing a National Reconstruction Fund of $15 billion to support Australian industry, to support Australian jobs across the food and agricultural sector, across defence, across renewables, across critical minerals, across all of these areas, why is this the subject of division in this place? And it is a bit beyond me, because one of the lessons of the pandemic is that we need to be more self-reliant. We need to be more resilient. We're vulnerable when we don't have what we need here or don't have the capacity to stand on our own and make things here. And that's why we went to the election committed to the National Reconstruction Fund. It's been supported by all of those industry bodies and by the peak business organisations. It's a simple principle. Australia has benefited over the years and will continue to do so from sending our resources overseas. We have an abundance of them, and that gives us revenue. But where possible, isn't it smarter to value add here, to create jobs here, to build capacity here, to get that income and greater economic return for the products that we have? And we know that in a range of areas, including everything that goes into a battery, nickel, lithium, copper, we have it in abundance here, some of the most abundant supplies in the world. And that's why the NRF has such broad support. An independent board will have oversight, just like the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and it will produce a return to government. So it's also good economics. But those opposite are opposing it. They're saying no to secure jobs, no to Australian manufacturing, no to new industries, no to a future made here. Negativity and obstruction just for the sake of it. Well, business, big and small, all support this. On Saturday night, they asked me to send a message to this parliament, and I committed to do so, that they should get on board, get out of the way and support the National Reconstruction Fund legislation that's before this parliament and support manufacturing here.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The IMF has expressly warned against Labor's $45 billion in off-budget spending because it will lead to higher inflation, which of course pushes interest rates up. Given the typical Australian mortgage has already increased by $1,400 a month under Labor, why is the Prime Minister ignoring the experts and implementing policies that will push these costs up even higher? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for her question that goes to why is it that the Labor government is fulfilling the mandate that we received last May to establish a series of funds to make a difference to our country. Now, the National Reconstruction Fund and what it will do to benefit the economy. If you have a product that I spoke about before, lithium, you can put it on a ship, export it off, wait for it to be made into a product of a battery, or everything that goes into a solar panel is also, of course, produced here. We can import it back and take solar panels as a good example. Currently over 85% of the world's solar panels are produced in one country. If things continue to project, that figure will rise to over 95% in a decade. Now, if you think about the role that renewables plays and how vulnerable that makes the world to supply chains, it makes absolute economic sense for us to, where possible, make products like that here. It's a matter not just of creating jobs here. It's a matter not just of creating higher economic growth here. It's also a matter of our national security and our resilience, our capacity to stand up for ourselves. And that's why we support the National Reconstruction Fund with $15 billion in it. We also have legislation before the House on our Housing Australia Future Fund. Both of those policies announced in budget reply speeches at a time where opposition leaders used to come out with policy. Both of those announced, both of those taken to an election, and both of those that we got a mandate for. Now that will produce an increased supply of housing. Now when you build housing, you create jobs, you create economic activity.
Prime Minister will pause. Order. I will hear from the Deputy Leader.
The IMF comments that were the subject of the question.
All right,
the
resume
IMF
your seat. The question was about the Prime Minister's budget and spending, and he is being relevant to the question. I remind him there was another part of the question, and he's entitled to answer the question in the last 50 seconds. I'll give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Housing Australia Future Fund will not only produce increased social housing, 4,000 of those homes is reserved for women and children escaping domestic violence. Good social policy. Because last night and tonight and the next night, women and children searching a safe haven from a circumstance not of their arising will be forced to sleep in their car or in a park, or worse still, return to a dangerous situation. That's why we identified this as a major issue. This is about building our national economic resilience. This should be policies that those opposites support. We have a clear mandate for them, and we clearly will continue to support them.
Order. I give the call to the member for Fraser.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How are the Australian people paying for the inaction over the last 10 years of the former government when it comes to national security? What are the consequences for the government and the nation?
Order. Order. Members on my right. The House will come to order immediately. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, I just direct your attention to the parts of the standing orders that go to what questions may be asked about, matters for which ministers are responsible. That question was about nothing other than the activities of the previous government, which are not things that this minister is responsible for.
The question. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Minister for Defence. Mr Speaker, the question goes directly to challenges now being faced by the Australian people and what are the consequences for the government. That's entirely a policy question for a minister.
The Deputy Prime Minister is also the Minister for Defence. This question relates directly to his portfolio, in particular the areas of national security that he has responsibility for. I'll listen to his answer carefully and I'll give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for his question. Mr Speaker, the opposition's opposition to the National Reconstruction Fund makes completely plain that the coalition is opposed to Australian manufacturing, and that they have an utter indifference to Australia being a country which makes things. But making things matters, particularly when it comes to national security. Now, the Albanese government is committed to Australia developing the capacity right here to build the next generation of nuclear-powered submarines in Adelaide. But what that will require initially is, over the next 5 years, an additional 2,000 skilled workers being trained. And this is a massive challenge. But once again, the country has been held back by the lost decade of those opposite. Now, when the coalition looked at this challenge, their response was to establish the Naval Shipbuilding College. This was an initiative which cost $114 million, and it resulted in precisely 203 jobs being placed. Now, there are lots of ways in which you can look at that number. That's more than $500,000 per placement. Over a 5-year period, that's about 40 jobs a year. Or looked at another way, given they had 7 different defence ministers, it's about 29 placements for each of them. But whichever way you look at it, it is woefully inadequate, because we need to train 2,000 workers over the next 5 years. Over the last 5 years, they trained just 200. This is another example of the yawning gap between their announcement and their delivery. Highly productive when it came to fanfare, completely hopeless when it came to outcome. All about the halftime entertainment, never about the game. And everyone should be completely aware that the legacy of those opposite, when it comes to defence, is 28 different defence programs running a total of 97 years over time. Coming out of the Jobs and Skills Summit last year, the Albanese government established a task force with the South Australian government so that we can have complete alignment between both tiers of government about the training investments required to generate the skilled workers that we will need for the future. Because on this side of the House, we understand one of the great things about manufacturing is the high-skilled, high-paid jobs that it generates. And we also understand that the thousands of future naval shipbuilders will be for this country a great strategic national asset.
Order. When the House is silent, the Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In May last year, in response to a single rate rise, the Prime Minister said Australians were facing a full-blown cost of living crisis. Given that the RBA has lifted rates 8 times since May, will the Prime Minister now accept responsibility for a cost of living crisis on his watch? Why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for his question. I agree with the bloke who said it's very clear the world has changed dramatically even in the past few months. We've seen a rapid shift to an inflationary environment. Interest rates are bucking decades of downward trends. He said that in September. He said that in September. I agree with my predecessor. He said there's not a lot we can do about things that are happening overseas that are impacting on our economy. The predecessor and his leader currently said nobody wants to see interest rates go up, but it's a reality of a world where there's inflation. I think Australians understand that. There's a lot of pressure, upward pressure, on interest rates at the moment. That happened when interest rates started to go up, which was on their watch.
Order. I give the call to the member for Wills.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the National Reconstruction Fund help Australia's status as a renewable energy superpower, and how has it been received? How does this build on existing programs to support investment in renewable and clean energy?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he knows that there is no bigger important city to Australia's manufacturing future than Melbourne and the suburbs of Melbourne. And he also knows that the National Reconstruction Fund will be key to ensuring that the world's climate emergency is Australia's jobs opportunity. And that's perhaps why the creation of the National Reconstruction Fund has been supported by the Energy Efficiency Council, the Smart Energy Council, the Electric Vehicle Council and Origin Energy, who have all explicitly supported the policy. And the honourable member also asked me how the National Reconstruction Fund will build on other agencies and policies. And there is no more important example than the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, Mr Speaker, which has been so important in Australia's development of renewable energy industries and is now the world's largest green bank, the world's most successful and largest green bank. And that's very important. It's also important because, as the Minister for Industry has pointed out, he has based the design of the National Reconstruction Fund on the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which is very important. And it's also relevant because the same arguments that are being used by the only group to oppose the National Reconstruction Fund, which is the Liberal and National Party, were the arguments they used to oppose the Clean Energy Finance Corporation 10 years ago. Exactly the same records on repeat, Mr Speaker. If you look at what they said at the time, the member for Bradfield said 10 years ago, Mr Speaker,
Order.
He said in his house—
The minister will resume his seat. The minister will resume his seat. I think I know what the manager is going to say, and I'll hear from him right now.
Mr Speaker, it is on relevance. I will concede it was a tightly drafted question. How is this program helping Australia's status as a renewable energy superpower?
Yes.
How has it been received? How is it built on existing achievements? Absolutely nothing about would the minister please give his usual incoherent spray against the track record of the previous government.
Resume your seat. The question also says, how does this build on existing programs? So the minister can be relevant to refer to the former government, but ask him not to make that the central part of his answer, and I give him the call.
Just trying to quote a bloke, Mr Speaker. The member for Bradfield said about the CEFC, "It is extraordinarily difficult to understand how anyone could imagine that this is going to be anything other than a spectacular financial disaster." That's what he said 10 years ago. He's nodding. He's nodding. And they say the same thing today. So devoid of imagination are they? They say the same thing today about the National Reconstruction Fund. Now, the CEFC has invested $11.7 billion in projects worth $42 billion. Every dollar the CEFC has invested has leveraged $2.6 of private sector investment. It's created thousands of jobs, 5.2 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, and reduced emissions by 240 million tonnes. But apart from that, it's been an utter disaster, Mr Speaker, a complete disaster. The member for Bradfield had a point. This is what you get when you have an opposition so devoid of their own ideas, so devoid of a constructive approach, so devoid of acting in the national interest that they just oppose, Mr Speaker. They opposed it 10 years ago. They tried for years to abolish it. They tried for years and years to abolish it, and they failed. And now they're trying to stop the next phase, the National Reconstruction Fund. This is what you get, Mr Speaker, when you have a leader of the opposition who's all opposition and no leader.
Order. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to Labor's first round of the mobile phone black spots program opened this month in 54 target locations. Why is it that 74% of these target locations are in Labor Party-held electorates? How is this fair and accountable for bushfire-prone communities across regional Australia desperate for better mobile coverage?
The House will come to order. There's far too much order. I could not hear one part of that question. There was so much noise. I'd ask the leader to return to the question containing in the question, and I'll give him the call now.
Really interesting.
I'd like him to be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to Labor's first round of the mobile phone black spots program opened this month in 54 target locations. Why is it that 74% of these target locations are in Labor Party-held electorates? How is this fair and accountable for bushfire-prone communities across regional Australia desperate for better mobile coverage?
All right. Order. The leader was heard in silence. The Prime Minister will be given the same courtesy. Members on my right.
Well,
I call the Prime Minister.
I will ask the Minister for Communications to add to the answer, but I should give credit where credit's due to the Minister for Energy, who suggested I should give you both barrel arrows on that question. because
Prime Minister,
frankly,
return to the question.
Frankly, to the Leader of the National Party, to come in here and ask a question about pork barrelling when the fund that was half funded by the federal government and half funded by the New South Wales government, when the Leader of the National Party in New South Wales sat down and changed the rules and changed the guidelines so that the bushfire-affected communities in the electorate of Macquarie got money taken away from them, and they looked at the colour-coded map.
The member for Petrie.
The colour-coded map.
The member for Petrie.
To exclude
Order.
Labor
The Leader of the
seats.
Nationals.
What a disgrace. From the National
The Leader of the
Party.
Nationals is
The
warned.
party of sports rights. The party of community safety rights. The party that...
The member for Groom will cease
When
interjecting.
I walk Toto sometimes...
Doesn't like Toto.
Order. The Prime Minister will just pause a moment. Order. There is far too much noise coming from my right. If this continues, I'm issuing a general warning. People will leave the chamber for disorderly conduct. I can't be clearer than that. I hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, on relevance, a very targeted question about the Mobile Black Spots program, a Commonwealth Government program. It is no answer to that to refer to completely unrelated programs.
The part the Prime Minister... Well, order. Members on my left, I'm trying to rule on the point of order. The Prime Minister will continue his answer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker.
The Minister for Regional Development.
But the extraordinary gall of the Leader of the National Party to ask this question, I mean, yeah, I sometimes go...
Order.
Tell us why. Because when you go for a walk near the Sydney Harbour Bridge past North Sydney Pool, you pass a project that was funded under the regional scheme because some people from the country might swim in it sometimes. I mean, you have got to
Members
be kidding.
on my left.
You have
the
got
Leader of the
to be
Nationals is
kidding.
on a warning. If he continues, he'll leave the chamber.
The rounds, of course, that we did are about election commitments that were made.
And now they're open.
That were made, and now they're open. That's what occurs. That's what occurs. That is why it's happened in this way. But for the Leader of the National Party, who I know is embarrassed by the performance of the New South Wales Nats, to ask this question is just extraordinary.
Order. The House will come to order so I can hear from the member for McEwen.
To the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Housing Australia Future Fund helped get more Australians into homes, and how has it been received?
Can I give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Housing and the Minister for Homelessness?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for McEwen for his important question, and because he knows that across our country the dream of a secure home becomes so much harder. It's become harder for Australians to buy a home, harder for Australians to rent a home, and indeed harder for people to find somewhere safe and secure to call home. But, Mr Speaker, these problems didn't emerge overnight. After almost a decade of little action from those opposite, we've added to the housing affordability challenges in this country.
Member for Deakin is on a
But
warning.
of course the Albanese Labor government was elected with a plan to tackle these challenges. And last week I introduced our legislation to deliver on our election commitments to ensure more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home. The $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund is the single biggest investment by a federal government in social and affordable housing in almost a decade. Returns from this fund will be there in perpetuity to invest in more homes for Australians that need it most. A commitment to build 20,000 new social homes and 10,000 affordable homes in the first 5 years of the fund. And as the Prime Minister has pointed out, 4,000 of those homes will be for women and children fleeing family violence and older women at risk of homelessness. It will also provide $200 million for improvements to housing in remote Indigenous communities. $100 million for crisis and transitional accommodation for older women and children, women and children leaving family and domestic violence. It will also include $30 million to build housing and fund specialist services for veterans who are experiencing homelessness. This will make a real difference to people's lives. It will provide real relief for those that need it most. But of course, what have we heard? Most Australians would expect people in this place to support more social and affordable housing. But of course we're hearing that that is not the case. Indeed, we're hearing that some would be coming into here to vote no to building more homes for women and children fleeing family violence. That people would be coming in here and voting no for building more homes for veterans that are homeless. Indeed, they would be coming into this place and voting no for people in need today, right across the country. People in our cities and in our regional towns. Australians are already paying the price for almost a decade of little action from those opposite on housing. These Australians cannot afford for us to waste another day.
Order. Just reminding the member for Deakin and the member Barker, they are both warned if they interject one more time, they'll be leaving the chamber. Give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
My question is to the Treasurer. People in my electorate of Brisbane are struggling to see a doctor as the number of bulk billing GPs in my community plummets. Treasurer, will you scrap the $250 billion Stage 3 tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, including politicians and pretty much everyone in this room, and assist people with real cost of living relief, such as boosting GP bulk billing payments and bringing dental into Medicare?
The member for Moreton will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Brisbane for his question. As the member knows, the government's position on Stage 3 tax cuts hasn't changed, but what we will do is we will pick up and run with the two other suggestions central to his question. I want to commend the Minister for Health for the work that he is doing in our Cabinet and in our government to do whatever we can to strengthen Medicare. We understand that primary health care is in the worst nick that it's been in since Medicare came in 40 years ago. And so a lot of the government's efforts, a lot of the government's time, a lot of the government's resources is working under the leadership of the Minister for Health to strengthen Medicare and strengthen health care in this country. And as we have said before, we have already set aside substantial funds for that task, and if there's more that we can responsibly do in this area, obviously we will consider doing it. And when it comes to the rest of the member's question about cost of living relief, we understand that Australians, whether it be in Brisbane, in your part of the world or right around the country, people are under pressure. And that's why a central part of our three-point plan to address inflation is relief. Cost of living relief for people doing it tough, whether it be their energy bills, whether it be their medicines, whether it be early childhood education, whether it be fee-free TAFE, whether it gets wages moving again. These are all essential parts of the government's work to try and put downward pressure on inflation, because people are faring. It's very difficult for people in the economy right now when we've got these cost of living pressures coming at us from around the world but felt around the kitchen table. And so this government will work with anyone in this country and on the crossbench to deliver responsible cost of living relief as part of that three-point plan, relief from cost of living pressures, repair our supply chains and show restraint in the budget so that we can deliver some of these priorities in the most responsible way.
Give the call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Northern Australia. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting communities impacted by flooding across Western Australia's Kimberley region? Why is it essential that this support be needs-based?
Give the call to the Minister for Northern Australia and Minister for Resources.
No worries. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Pearce for her great question today. Mr Speaker, earlier this month I went to the remote Western Australian town of Fitzroy Crossing. I was accompanied by the member for Durack to meet with members of the local community recovering from the devastating floods caused by ex-tropical cyclone Ellie. The damage that has been done to crucial infrastructure and homes in the region is very significant. The floods devastated families, disrupted businesses and supply chains and has sorely tested community resilience. We've all seen those terrible images of a very broken Fitzroy River bridge that once crossed the Fitzroy River. Importantly, this government acted very quickly through the Minister for Transport, Minister Catherine King, to change heavy vehicle access for road trains to ensure the freight of food and essential supplies kept moving to north-western Australia. And I want to acknowledge and thank Senator Glenn Sterle. There is no greater advocate in this whole building of advocacy for trucks and truckies and the freight industry as a whole. What we do know is that essential supplies to Fitzroy Crossing and to the Kimberley require a detour of 7,400 kilometres. It's an extraordinary detour, and that's why it's important we make sure those road trains can be as big as they possibly can safely and carry as much as they can, all delivered by Aussie truckies. This government continues to work closely with the WA government to support the ongoing recovery. I want to acknowledge the Minister for Emergency Management, Senator Watt, and his team for all they are doing to help those in Fitzroy Crossing and other affected areas like Derby and Broome. Commonwealth support is available for those in natural disaster-impacted communities through the $1,000 Australian Government Disaster Recovery Payment and income subsidies through the Disaster Recovery Allowance. National Emergency Management Agency officers have been deployed to Western Australia to work with the WA Department of Fire and Emergency Services and with the local council in Derby, West Kimberley. And further, NEMA personnel have been on the ground in Fitzroy Crossing assessing the damage with the local communities and also with DFES and WA Main Roads. NEMA is working very closely with the National Indigenous Australians Agency to identify recovery needs at the community level. We know that traditional owners need to be part of the conversation on how we support those communities to recover and rebuild with resilience. And these must be in ways that are culturally appropriate and, of course, needs-based. Services Australia have deployed extra staff as well, going to that remote region, and they have served admirably as they had to relocate to a new office when their office was significantly damaged. And I want to thank the local services manager, Zara, who the member for Durack and I visited, and her whole team for all their work they're doing with the community to ensure people are well supported through this disaster.
Has concluded. Give a call to the member for Hughes.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Back in December, when the government recalled Parliament to pass its energy market intervention, it promised direct relief to the energy bills of millions of Australians. 3 months later, nothing has been delivered. And last Friday, the New South Wales government said it is yet to receive the support it was promised from the Albanese government. Why has this relief not been delivered?
The member will resume his seat for a moment. I cannot hear. There's far too much interjection from ministers to my right. I need to be able to hear the question, so I'm asking for silence. And I'm going to, out of courtesy, give the call to the honourable member for Hughes again. I give the call to the member for Hughes.
Prime Minister, why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Oh, I didn't hear that. I'll call the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hughes for her question. It goes to two issues. One issue is the attitude of the New South Wales government towards these our plan that passed the parliament in December, and the second is what about relief? Well, the member for Hughes was amongst those who voted against the $1.5 billion, voted against it, wanted it never, ever to be received.
Member for Broome will cease interjecting.
And
order.
And when it comes to the New South Wales government, the New South Wales Treasurer and Energy Minister said this: "We're not on the side of energy bosses, we're on the side of consumers and businesses." Who was he talking about was on the side of energy bosses rather than consumers and businesses? Those opposite, who voted against the plan, voted against price caps that are already having an impact on prices, as was identified last week.
The member for Bowman. Give the call to the member for Hasluck.
To the Minister for Defence Personnel. What support has been provided by the Australian Defence Force to support natural disasters that have occurred over this summer? And how is that support prioritised?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank my friend the member for Hasluck for her important question. And I know she'll be pleased to know that many reservists who participated in assisting with the floods in WA's north were from 13 Brigade, the brigade that the member for Hasluck has supported through her work as a member of the 109 Signal Squadron. And I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the hundreds of defence personnel and reservists who sacrificed their summer breaks to support their fellow Australians when they needed it most. There is still flooding throughout northern, western and central Queensland, with some local resupply disruptions continuing. Flooding is forecast to continue to impact the Darling River communities in coming weeks as water continues to move downstream. Meanwhile, flooding has peaked and is slowly beginning to fall along the length of South Australia's River Murray. The House, of course, will be aware of the unprecedented flood damage caused by ex-tropical cyclone Ellie as it continues to impact parts of the Kimberley region of Western Australia. Through Operation Flood Assist, our ADF personnel have helped with sandbagging, levee construction, evacuation support, transport and logistics, clean-up support and air traffic control. In just the last 5 weeks, up to 275 ADF full-time and reservist personnel at a time worked hand-in-hand with the Western Australian Departments of Fire and Emergency Services and of Communities to ensure that people from remote and regional communities were relocated from floodwaters, helping more than 1,200 people. I thank both the member for Durack and Senator Dodson for their advocacy for their communities throughout the flood emergencies. They both joined me on the ground in Broome to receive briefings on the work of the ADF in the flood efforts and to thank them for their work. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister, the Minister for Emergency Management, the Minister for Northern Australia, who joined the Premier of Western Australia, the WA Minister for Emergency Services and WA Minister for Community Services, who have all visited the flood zones. Thank you for your support for the communities of WA's northwest. Defence remains responsive to changing requirements and remains ready to respond to requests for assistance around Australia. And I'd like to remind Western Australians in Broome, Derby West Kimberley, Wyndham East Kimberley and Halls Creek, you are eligible for assistance under Commonwealth State Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements. Services Australia staff are on the ground in Fitzroy Crossing and Broome to ensure people get the assistance that they need. I'd like to remind those communities in the north of WA that under the Albanese Labor government, we don't believe that it's your postcode that should determine your access to disaster support, but your need. When communities need help, we will make sure that that happens.
Good job. On indulgence, briefly, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, on indulgence, I want to, on behalf of the Coalition, thank the men and women of the Australian Defence Force for the tireless effort over many events from the east to the west, from the top of our country to the furthest point south. They are there in the hour of need, and as the Minister rightly points out, they will go to the aid of Australians. They will provide logistics support. They will help in the recovery and in the rebuild, as we've seen in various floods and natural disasters around the country. I want to pay tribute to all of those who spend time away from their families. And if you join the Australian Defence Force, you're there to protect and to defend our country. It's not their first call or first preference to be deployed on some of these operations, and we're respectful of that, but they do lend a very significant hand. They provide a lot of support to those communities, and we would work very closely with the government. There's still the outstanding issue of medal recognition for those in relation to recent deployments. We very strongly support the awarding of that medal. It would send a very clear message to them and to their families for the sacrifice that they've made in our country's name, and we would be very willing to entertain those discussions with the government.
Call to the honourable member for Mackellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Industry and Science. The stacking of Commonwealth government boards and entities with party-friendly appointments has become all too common and undermines the very foundations of our democracy. The National Reconstruction Fund bill proposes the establishment of a board that will oversee the disbursement of $15 billion. But the relevant ministers are set to appoint all the board members themselves. How can the minister assure the Australian people that this board will be truly independent of government?
Order. The member for Longman. Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you,
Order.
Speaker.
Members on my left.
I just want to thank the member for McKellar. I appreciate not only the question, but for the entire crossbench, if I may say, the constructive way in which you've worked with us on this. We think this is a moment for nation building. The National Reconstruction Fund is a significant investment in capability, and we want people to feel like they've got a part to play in setting this up for the longer term, because it will be important for the economy and for communities well into the future. So it is important to be able to take those factors. We're not going to agree on everything, obviously, but people expect that the parliament will work collaboratively, which is exactly what is happening from there. Not from here, but certainly from there. And if I may say to the member for McKellar, there were two big motivations in terms of setting the fund up. One was obviously to attend to those supply chain issues, to learn the lessons from the pandemic, not to say that we've picked those lessons up and then do nothing afterwards, but rather rebuild capability in those priority areas. And the second thing, member for McKellar, that we wanted to ensure is that we saw in the last term of parliament huge amounts of money be allocated, not in the national interest, but in political interest. You saw the grants, you saw the rewards. We were all shocked by that, and we wanted to do better. So this is why we announced, and particularly the Prime Minister, when this was announced in March last year, emphasised the independence of the board, that these decisions would be made in a way that would be independent of political decision-making, and that you'd have people of capability making it. And if I can go to the heart of your question, we want to make sure that all the investment decisions of the NRF will be solely made by the board. And in terms of the composition that you referred to, the legislation has listed skills that we think the two responsible ministers, myself and the Minister for Finance, have to have regard to in making the appointments. Experience in things like banking and finance, venture capital, private equity, economics, industry policy, have that industrial background that is really important. And just like the successful CFC opposed by those opposite, we want to make sure that the NRF operates along those lines where decisions made in the national interest, not a colour-coded spreadsheet in sight, not the way that they made them. We want to make sure that these decisions get made in the national interest for the longer-term benefit of the country, rebuilding manufacturing, creating jobs. Unlike those opposite, no to jobs, no to manufacturing, no to regional opportunity. They love dressing in the high-vis, but they never back the workers who actually wear it. Never there. And all those people who profess manufacturing will need to account for their failure to support it properly.
Has concluded. Order. Give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government working to improve transparency and accountability in the aged care sector after nearly a decade of rampant neglect?
I give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for his question. With almost 10,000 people over the age of 65 in his electorate, I know that lifting the standard of aged care is a priority for him, and I thank him for his advocacy. The Albanese government is committed to the delivery of safe and high-quality aged care. No older person should have to experience substandard aged care. But you can't improve what you can't measure. And that is why we are shining a light on aged care services that are not meeting standards or community expectations. Australians have the right to know. And that is why in December the Albanese government delivered a key recommendation of the Royal Commission when we delivered star ratings, so that older people and their families have greater information and greater choice. Star ratings provide a nationally consistent benchmark to monitor, compare and improve residential aged care services, and we are working with providers to improve their ratings. The fact that almost 1 in 10 residential aged care homes have either a 1- or 2-star rating shows that after 9 years of neglect, there is a lot of work for us to do to reform aged care. On a number of fronts, Mr Speaker, because the opposition, as we know, did not want the problems in aged care highlighted when they were in charge. But I was surprised to find out that on the day that we released star ratings, that they didn't want the problems in aged care highlighted even on our watch. On the day that we delivered star ratings, the opposition called for them to be torn down. They would not know transparency if they were looking through a window, Mr Speaker, not even when it's on our watch when we are charged with fixing it. Mr Speaker, transparency is not a bad thing. It's not a forbidden word like those on the other side of the House would have you believe. Transparency also lets you highlight the good work that is happening by hard-working people who are doing their utmost to lift the standard of care in aged care in this country. And since the release of star ratings, I have visited 15 aged care homes from the Sunshine Coast to regional Queensland to Tasmania, and in my own electorate of Lilly. I'm proudly the representative of 2 5-star homes in Lilly. And I talked to the aged care workers in each of those 15 homes about the components of the star ratings and the work that they did to achieve them. Sam at Lutheran Services Salem Aged Care, a four-star facility in Toowoomba, runs the Happy Table project, which is about creating a restaurant-like experience, and he works with a dietitian to make sure residents are nourished properly. Bowder Care in Nambour is a 5-star facility, and talking with workers and CEO Helen Sharpley there, it is clear why. By requiring transparency, we showcase standards of care the sector can aspire to. I commend all these facilities for being ambitious for aged care like we are.
Give the call to the honourable member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to the report from the St Vincent de Paul Society showing that combined gas and electricity bills for the average Victorian household have soared above $4,000 in parts of Victoria, including in my electorate of Gippsland. And average household gas bills will increase by about $675 or 45% this year. Why have these households still not seen any relief? Prime Minister, why do Australian families always pay more under Labor?
Give the call to the Prime Minister. Order. The House will come to order.
I thank the member for Gippsland for his question, and I congratulate him on his re-elevation back to the front bench. Back to the front bench. Now, I'm not sure if the member for Gippsland was here in December, because he did represent Australia very well with the member for Dunkley, I know, at the United Nations, and he wants to go back, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker. And if I sat with a mob who voted against cheaper prices, I'd want to go back too. I'd want to go back too, Mr Speaker. But this is what the Reserve Bank of Australia put out last week about gas prices. Wholesale electricity and gas prices declined in response to the announcement of the temporary price caps on domestic gas and thermal coal in the Energy Price Relief Plan on 9 December 2022. Futures markets now suggest that wholesale electricity and gas prices will be lower in 2023 and 2024 than previously expected. That is exactly what the Reserve Bank of Australia said last year. It's a pity that those opposite voted against that measure.
The Prime Minister will take a break. I think the Prime Minister's concluded his answer. I give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What has the Royal Commission into Robodebt uncovered in relation to warnings of the Robodebt scheme's unlawfulness?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Cunningham for her question.
Order.
Madeline Masterton appeared as a witness in the Royal Commission with Victorian Legal Aid on the 31st of October last year. For the record, she's a clinical research nurse, a credentialed diabetes educator. She's attained a Masters of Nursing Society, University of Melbourne, a Bachelor of Arts, University of Western Australia, a grad certificate in diabetes education, Deakin University. She worked part-time during attaining these degrees and intermittently received modest Centrelink payments. She's also, although it doesn't go on her CV, a victim of the previous government's unlawful robo-debt scheme. She received her illegal robo-debt letter in mid-2018. She eventually rang Victorian Legal Aid, who supported her in an action against the government. To stop her, on the 27th of March 2019, the government received the Masterton advice, Exhibit 21731, which I hold in my hand. Now, this advice only came to light because of the Royal Commission. Senate inquirers were unable to get this advice. There's another example that without the Royal Commission, which those opposite opposed, we wouldn't know what I'm about to tell you. The advice said the applicant would have good prospects of succeeding in a claim for relief on the basis the use of the apportioned ATO data will not establish that she owed a debt under the Act. Now, magically, as happened on 76 other occasions, the government recalculated the debt down to zero when someone took them to court. But the Masterton case had wider-ranging implications for the scheme as a whole. The advice further notes, and I quote, "It's clear from the above. Our analysis suggests that there are wider legal risks involved in the Commonwealth solely using apportioned data to determine whether a debt is owed to the Commonwealth in relation to the payment of social security dependent on a fortnightly income test." The government were told, the former coalition government were told unequivocally, you've got a problem with this scheme. They were unequivocally told on many occasions, but in this case with the Masterton advice, which the government, the former government, did not want us to see, it spells it out. It spelled it out in March of 2019. 240 days before the member for Fadden, just about the last of the robo-debt ministers still here, took any action on it. What's remarkable about Madeleine Masterton, she didn't want to be the subject of these issues, but she does say this at the close of her statement. The outcome of the class action is not compensation for the meals skipped, school trips forgone, the stress and fear and despair that some families, individuals no doubt experienced. She says, and I think she speaks for all of Australia, I would like to hear remorse from the robo-debt architects for causing such harm. Those opposite knew and they did nothing about it for 4.5 years.
Order. Give the call to the member for O'Connor.
My question is to the Minister for Social Services. In question time last week, the Minister responded to a question from my friend the member for Durack and informed the House that the antisocial behaviour being experienced in the former cashless debit card trial site of the East Kimberley was due to catastrophic flooding throughout the Kimberley region. In the Goldfield region of my electorate, there's been no flooding. So can the Minister please explain why there has been a massive increase in alcohol-related social harm as participants have come off the cashless debit card trial in my region?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question, because, of course, those opposite continue to their ideological love of the cashless debit card when there was evidence after evidence that it was not making a difference. When it comes to the Goldfields area, I am aware that the Shire of Leonora has reported an increase in antisocial behaviour in their community, including an increase of hospital visitations, which has been attributed to an increase of people coming to the community from the NG lands, noting that these lands were never in the cashless debit boundaries. So to suggest that somehow that the influx of people from areas outside the cashless debit card site is somehow linked to the removal of this card is disingenuous and wrong. I also understand that the towns of Laverton and Kambata have also had an increase in antisocial behaviour, which has been linked to the population influx, which of course is not unusual for this time of year, and that most of the increase were from people from areas that were never in the cashless debit boundaries. Across the region, in response to this population influx that happens at this time of the year, the City of Kalgoorlie-Boulder has implemented its summer response strategy, which has seen several return-to-country trips taking place to help those who have come into town and unable to get back home. I know that the summer response strategy is also including...
The Minister will pause for a moment, and the member for Deakin on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, point of order on relevance. The minister's running out of alibis very quickly.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. Order. Resume your seat. The member for Deakin has been continually disrupting question time today. He's had multiple warnings, and now he's disrespected the chamber with abuse of standing orders. He will leave the chamber under 94A. I want to be very... Order. Just the minister pause for a moment. That will be the final warning with someone abusing standing orders. It has been continually happening. Question time will not occur with that behaviour. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I was updating the House on the summer response strategy, which has been ensuring that people in the Goldfields region are able to get back home to country, and this also includes the wraparound supports that these people need. Of course, the Coalition continues to try and draw a desperate link to anything to do with the cashless debit card. And of course, we heard it in the chamber today with the member for Riverina somehow suggesting that income support has been abolished in the Northern Territory. This is simply not the case. But while those opposite continue to deliver misinformation and confusion around the country, our government will continue to do the things that work, provide the support that works, that help people within communities.
Order. The member for Page. The call to the member for Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government's delivery of fee-free TAFE and vocational education and training helping to produce a skilled workforce?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the member for Cornwall for her question and for her advocacy for TAFE, particularly in Melbourne's north and Melbourne's west. Speaker, the government, of course, as you know, inherited $1 trillion of public debt, but it also was left with a massive skills deficit, across the economy.
Order. Members on my left, the member for Page is warned now. The manager of opposition business on a point of order.
Specific. On relevance, the question was very specific. How is a fee-free TAFE helping to produce a skilled workforce? That is not an excuse.
Resume your seats. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. You don't have the call. You don't have the call. Resume your seat. There's far too much noise in the chamber. The manager has raised a point of order. I'm going to call the minister back to the question.
Thank you, Speaker. And left, of course, with a massive skills deficit. Wherever you looked across the economy, whether it was the care sector, IT, traditional trades, there were skill shortages across the economy. And for that reason, it was critical that we moved very quickly and struck agreements with all state and territory governments to deliver for this year 180,000 fee-free TAFE and VET places, and that's what we've done. Reached agreement with all governments, something that the other previous government could not do, to supply the skills to the economy that are in demand. Speaker, that has been, of course, an absolutely vital thing for businesses that are crying out for skills that are in need, for workers that need the skills that are in demand so they can have secure employment, so they can have a decent career progression, they can have decent wages. That's why it's so important that we supply the skills that are needed. Now, Speaker, the enrolments for TAFEs and VET providers is still open. I call upon those people that are interested to enter into courses of skills that are in demand to do so, providing opportunities for them in their employment, providing skills that, as I said earlier, businesses need. I think it would be a wonderful thing for them to be considering doing, Speaker. because there's no doubt it is important to get qualifications past secondary school. 9 out of every 10 jobs that are created are indeed created with the skills that are needed, and those are things that are post-school qualification, university degrees and indeed VET qualifications. So it's critical that people acquire the skills that are in demand so they can have decent employment, decent career progression and the like. I met, when I was at Box Hill TAFE, I met with a student, Thomas, who had originally entered into a university course, academically very capable, but found it was not for him. Instead, now he's enrolled into an electrotechnology course, of course, going to be one of those people that can participate in what is, of course, clearly the transformation of the energy sector. He has chosen that path. That is going to lead, of course, to a great career in the energy sector, and it will be an area, of course, that is a massive demand, and it will mean a great job and a great employment career for him.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Lindsay. Order. We'll just resume your seat for a moment until recording is picking up the member for Lindsay. I'll give the member for Lindsay the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Almost half of young women aged 16 to 24 have experienced mental health issues in the last financial year, with more than a third of women under 35 being those who access the additional 10 Medicare subsidised better access psychology sessions provided under the previous coalition government. Does the minister agree that accessing those sessions disproportionately impacts young women?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. The member for Lyons is warned.
Stop the date.
The member for Fisher, let me be really clear on this. The time to interject is not before a minister starts speaking. If everyone can get that message loud and clear, the question will be heard in silence, and then when the minister, he or she, walks to the dispatch box, there will not be interjections. So give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lindsay for another question on this program. The program is called Better Access, and as the member knows, I'm sure, the previous government decided to add 10 additional sessions to the maximum rebatable session number for a 2-year period, in light of particularly the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, Sydney and regional parts of those 2 states. In the March election, before the March budget, before the election last year, the former government decided not to extend the expiry of those additional 10 sessions beyond the 31st of December. Now, when we came to government, we kept an open mind about that. Even though the former government had made a conscious decision not to extend the additional 10 sessions, we kept an open mind about that. And I indicated, I think in response to a question from one of the crossbench members, I think the member for North Sydney, that I'd be looking at the evaluation of better access when it came to me, an evaluation done on a 10-yearly basis, again by the University of Melbourne. And what that evaluation said very clearly was, as the previous evaluation had said 10 years ago, this is an effective program where it is able to be received, but it is highly inequitable. That if you are living in a wealthy suburb in the inner parts of the major cities, you are far more likely to be able to access a session than if you are in the outer suburbs, or particularly in regional and rural Australia. And what the evaluation then went on to say was that the addition of the extra 10 sessions had made that inequity profoundly worse. That what had happened is that all of the additional sessions had gone to the richest 40% of Australians, mostly to the richest 20%, and that the poorest 40% of Australians had seen their access to services actually go backwards. The number of new entrants to the scheme went backwards by 7%. That is to say, of all of the people that every single member in this House would have come into their office,
the minister will resume. I'm going to hear from the minister is being relevant, so I'm going to hear from the member for Lindsay. I just said the minister is being relevant, so I'll take a point of order.
Thank you. Relevance. I did
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. No, resume your seat. It does not work that way. The minister is entitled to answer the question. You may not like the answer, but as long as it's relevant, he may continue. I'll give him the call. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Every member in this House would have people coming to them, particularly after COVID, saying they cannot get in to see a psychologist. The psychologists in their areas have closed their books. And what the evaluation said was that the additional 10 sessions that the former government decided not to extend before the 31st of December had made that problem profoundly worse. That tens and tens of thousands of people had been cut out of the system altogether, making better access actually worse. Now, the Assistant Minister for Mental Health and I held a round table with about 80 different groups and individuals last week, and I can say this, that other than the colleges of the private psychologists, no one at that seminar said we should reintroduce those 10 extra sessions.
Order. The minister's time has concluded. There will be silence in the House so I can hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the government doing to ensure more Australians can access high-speed broadband?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question and her ongoing advocacy when it comes to high-speed broadband in outer metropolitan Sydney. Labor, of course, founded the National Broadband Network with the purpose of providing fast, reliable and affordable broadband for all Australians. And the original vision, of course, was for a world-class fibre national broadband network, underpinned by sound long-term economics. It was about access. It was about opportunity. It was about leveraging an essential national asset to drive social and economic benefits, and importantly to ensure that we remained world competitive, which is why we took a policy to the election to make the NBN better, to invest $2.4 billion over 4 years to give an additional 1.5 million premises full fibre access. And what that means is that 90% of homes and businesses in the NBN fixed line footprint will have access to gigabit speeds by 2025, 660,000 of those premises being in regional Australia. I'm pleased to inform the House, Mr Speaker, that today we are delivering, and we have announced the latest tranche of suburbs that will be eligible for full fibre upgrades, and that is 1 million additional premises right across Australia. 1 million additional premises. Now, the latest 1 million premises are in suburbs and towns across the states and territories, including a significant proportion, as I said, in regional areas. Now, these upgrades have been determined based on NBN Co's analysis of a range of factors, including the likely take-up of higher speed tiers and the costs of the upgrade. And these are important in ensuring that the upgrades provide a commercial return to the company. Now, the remaining locations to be upgraded as part of this government's investment in expanding full fibre access are expected to be announced by early 2024. Now, the Albanese government's fibre repair job is enabling the NBN to reach its full potential and giving Australian families and small businesses access to the world-class broadband infrastructure they deserve. Now, what are these benefits? The benefits include faster uploads and download speeds, more reliable connection, greater latency, and they're even more pronounced for larger households. Because if many devices are used, higher speeds means that the whole family can be online at the same time. Now, what this reflects, Mr Speaker, is that these 1 million premises reflect the implementation of the values that this government has brought to this policy. Equality of opportunity, setting up Australia for a better future, ensuring that all Australians, irrespective of what they earn or where they live, have the same access to the best world-class, high-quality broadband, and that's what we're delivering.
Call to the Prime Minister.
On that very positive note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.